Just posting up a video on adding a sub and amp to a 2009 MY10 Lexus ISF. I utilised this cavity here to replicate what the factory done on the other side with the OEM amp. From the factory, the left hand side cavity is taken up by this deep pocket, in contrast to the OEM amplifier having a shallow pocket. I had this pocket mirrored and 3D printed by a company here in Australia. Clips right into the factory spot on the left hand side and allows you to fit an amplifier underneath. Now, just one thing to note, because I've mirrored the right hand side pocket, you'll notice that the cutouts are different compared to the left hand side's original pocket. It's larger. For an ISF it makes no difference at all. Everything fits back into place, including the wheel cover. For an IS250, however, this may be relevant. I believe there is a plastic tub that gets inserted underneath here, and in which case, if you did want to follow the same route as I did, you probably need to cut out a little bit extra there. I'll leave a link in the description to the company that I used to have this made, in case you do want to follow the same idea that I've done. I chose the Kenwood KAC M3001 amp, namely because it's compact. It has 200 watts RMS at 4 ohms, 300 watts RMS at 2 ohms. Plenty for me, just to add a sub for a bit of extra bass. The audio control LC2I is what's providing the RCA signal to the amp by tapping the factory speaker signals. When looking at a line-out converter, just be mindful. A lot of people have complained about their line-out converters going up in smoke, likely because they have lower input wattage ratings. The LC2I has 400 watts RMS of input. It's a huge blanket. You've got to remember that these systems here, the factory head unit does not have speaker wires to tap. It communicates directly to the OEM amp through MO data bus, which means the only way you're tapping speaker signals from the factory system is when it's coming out of the amplifier already amplified. This is a right-hand drive vehicle, so the power wire for the amp was run entirely up the left-hand side of the car. The battery has to be removed in the engine bay to get to the grommet. The grommet has unused portions on it, and the other side of that grommet ends up in the cabin underneath the glove box in the passenger footwell area. I ran the power wire underneath the scuff plates and all the way behind the back seat where all the factory wiring went into the boot area or trunk. Along the way I also found a factory grounding point behind here. I removed the factory ground wires from that area, taped up the area, wire wheel brushed it, sandpapered it, reinstalled the factory grounds and my amplifier ground wire. The power and ground wires from the Kenwood amp were just daisy chained across to the LC2I with a 1 amp fuse in between, as per Audio Control's recommendation. Now, the remote wire was tapped from the factory amp, which I'll go into shortly. The LC2I does have a GTO signal sense feature. For some reason it just would not work, so I had to move the jumper to the bypass position, which means you need to put a manual remote wire in yourself, and it does not use signal sense. When you put a remote wire into one of these, the remote out is automatically fed through, and that remote wire is sent to the Kenwood amp. I did want things to be removable and serviceable where possible, so I got a 6-pin crimp Molex connector, using 5 of the pins and wires, of course. 4 wires for the left and right speaker inputs, and the remote wire being the 5th wire. That's just a loom that I made up with 5 wires in some loom tubing. Follows factory wiring underneath this trim at the rear of the vehicle, and finally ends up in this cavity here where the factory amp is. On the factory amp side, this is where you'll tap all your signals. Now, rather than cutting and chopping and splicing and putting T-taps, I made what's called T-harnesses, which is basically unplugging your factory plugs, not altering them at all, making a pass-through harness, which goes directly back into the amplifier, and just tapping out what you want in between of those harnesses. I sent all the wires I tapped into this Molex plug here, which carries over to the other side of the car. I will leave a link in the description to the plugs that I used so you can make your own harnesses up. I'll also leave a link in the description for the wiring diagram which I made up for this particular year model car, as I found it to be different to previous year models. I made a color-coded chart telling you what every single wire does. Now, when it came to tapping the speaker signals for the LC2i, I must admit it was trial and error. The logical choice is always to do the subwoofer wires, because you're adding an aftermarket subwoofer. Now, my particular system did not have a dual voice coil subwoofer from factory. It only had the brown and light green wire, and the subwoofer itself only had 2 wires going into it. On other Lexus vehicles, you're going to find that they have a second pair of wires going to the sub for a dual voice coil, which I believe are pink and light blue. Initially, I tried feeding just the subwoofer wires that I had into the LC2i and jumpering them across into the right channel as well, as per Audio Control's website. Now, it did work, but there was missing a lot of bass notes on songs I was familiar with. So I then read other recommendations from various different sources. Some say to go straight to this plug here, tap the front left door woofer and front right woofer wires, and use them as the signals. I also read that you can try a combination of subwoofer and one of the door woofer wires. I tried that, and it worked great. There were a lot of concerns about people saying that the signals will not be matched perfectly or balanced and so on. I tried it, and it sounds great. All the bass notes were restored, and the levels sound very balanced to my liking. But trial and error is the key to see how happy you are with what you're tapping into. This final plug here, that thin white wire there next to the blue wire, is the remote wire for the factory amp, and that was also tapped out and carried to the other side. This is just a final look of how it came out once it was all clipped in back together.